Welcome to the MSDW Podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com, and it is time for another news roundup. I'm joined once again by our assistant editor, Eamon McCarthy-Earls. Eamon, hello.
Hello, Jason. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. We haven't done a review episode like this in a while, Eamon, so there is a lot to cover. We'll put links into the show notes for everything we talk about today, and we'll try to move quickly here, hit on a lot of topics. I found that there's both kind of a mix of popular articles and also the most important articles. And interestingly, they're not always the same in my humble opinion. So, but we will get to both and definitely a lot of overlap. So let's get to it. What do we have first?
Well, Jason, you did a great article a few weeks ago about Forms Pro.
Yeah, so Forms Pro is an interesting approach. I kind of took note of it. It came along with, the announcement of it came along with some other updates that Microsoft has planned for new applications in the Dynamics 365 and I guess the larger business applications portfolio. Forms Pro is related to the existing Microsoft Forms that people know from Office 365, and it's seems to have a sort of built-in connection to Common Data Service, and it seems to be better aligned with building out surveys directly related to customer service and other sort of customer experience, customer-facing scenarios. So we went from the announcement that it's coming to a public preview in just a couple of weeks, and so I thought both the initial announcement of it was interesting and the ability to sort of see it with a little video demo and know that there's now a public preview of it that's open for people to start playing with it. I also do wonder, I really should dive into this a little more. I haven't talked to folks much about it, but I thought it was an interesting announcement kind of soon after SAP's Qualtrics acquisition and the idea of, engaged experience and the analysis of customer experience. And I think some of the opportunities there, it certainly seems to me like one of those areas where companies like Microsoft, SAP, Salesforce, and others are going to look to really sort of wring every bit of data out of the customer relationship, under the theory that more data is better and it allows for better analytics, better modeling, and hopefully, I think, better outcomes for the companies that really are able to put that information to use. So my guess is this is the first step in I would guess, much more of a push to make surveying something that Microsoft's really committed to. They already did have, Microsoft already does have this voice of the customer application, which I also noted. It seems like this is totally separate. This is based on forms, and it's also not built exactly the same way. The voice of the customer is very, very tightly ingrained into the customer experience apps, whereas this is a little more modular, separated, uses the Common Data Service, but it's not so tightly weaved into the typical CRM experience.
So a little bit more sort of independent from the Dynamics 365 for customer engagement voice of the customer option that's already out there.
Yeah, really tied to Common Data Service, which really opens it up to not only the first-party Microsoft apps, but Microsoft's bigger business application story. So I think what I'd be watching for there is just how quickly are they pushing new features to it, how quickly are they evolving the offering to make it more sophisticated, and I guess the other thing that I noted on it when the public preview came out was just the demo and how they built in. They might call it AI, but basically some data analytics, some correlations that they do by default. When you start getting results from a form, you can say, well, answers to question 1 correlated with answers to question 3, and people who answered this on question 1 were most likely to answer this on question 4. So they were kind of showing some of those, fairly straightforward, sort of correlation types of connections between answers on a sort of a built-in basis. So it'll be interesting to see how things like that move forward and what other scenarios they try to build for.
Among other recent announcements, we also saw on March 6th information from some partners who have seen some of the latest Dynamics 365 pricing and licensing data from Microsoft. And it appears that Dynamics 365 Project Service Automation will be removed from the business applications portfolio with plans to offer it in combination with other project management tools instead.
Yeah, that's right. And this one really, I guess, was a bit of a scoop. It is it's something that partners saw just before I wrote about it. Partners don't really know what this is going to mean for those who are really invested in project service automation. The product's not going away, but it seems to be basically converging with some new plans around the traditional Microsoft Project and Project Online services, where those have been, Microsoft started to build out sort of new, again, common data service-based applications for project. And I guess once you start building other applications on CDS and you have Project Service Automation app kind of built on CDS too, and Microsoft appears to be saying, let's put a more cohesive project management story together and sort of bring it all back into one place. I think there was always a question of why there was Project Service Automation based on the CRM platform plus Project plus there's also the Finance and Operations Project Automation stuff, which is not being touched by this. So I think it remains to be seen exactly how this will shake out. It doesn't nothing's going away, but I think it'll just change how it's categorized, and it seems like it'll change the trajectory of the roadmap for PSA.
We also saw that Microsoft is setting new storage pricing for PowerApps and Dynamics 365 for customer engagement as well, right around the same time.
Yeah, I have more coming on this. I mean, you can really start to see some of the pieces falling into place in terms of the larger business applications, suite beyond Dynamics 365. I think this is really very much something that's going to impact D365 customer engagement, but it's not because of it. This really appears to be these pricing changes seem to be Microsoft's effort to get ahead of where they see PowerApps going in the future and the Power Platform as more companies start to embrace it and try to build more complex things. They want to make sure that they're using the right kind of data storage capacity for the right kinds of scenarios. So storing files in one type of storage, storing relational data in another type of storage, log data, and as we heard earlier this week in an interview on a podcast that Mark Smith did with a Microsoft rep, looking out further, graph data, IoT data, audit data, other kinds of sort of within IoT data, I think other kinds of sort of device-based data that could really scale to a way bigger level than anything that sort of a traditional CRM app would be built to do, or that PowerApps today is built to support.
At the very end of February, there was a sales event in Europe that we covered that focused on the Dynamics 365 suite, particularly the April 2019 updates that are coming up. And Microsoft revealed at that event that there's going to be a wide range of changes from sort of customer service analytics and virtual agents to retail fraud protection, product visualization, and mixed reality mobile device support, among others.
I mean, yeah, this announcement was really all over the place in terms of the different kinds of, I guess, first-party apps that Microsoft wants to build. It's really when I saw the list, it was, even the title of our article is just kind of this laundry list of different kinds of things that are being added: mixed reality, analytics, virtual agents, fraud detection, which I didn't know was coming and seems a little random, but also certainly sounds like a helpful business tool. All of these different things are sort of happening at the same time. This mixed reality stuff is certainly very interesting. I think I'm not really sure how what Microsoft's goals are with some of these mixed reality HoloLens based and I guess now mobile device, smartphone based apps are. It's really a whole nother kind of area where where businesses need help. It seems maybe to me that these are going to be partly sort of model applications for using HoloLens and using some of Microsoft's other augmented reality technology, kind of like primary cases that, and then when companies want to just use them on their own, they have those as a base off of which to build, or at least to just sort of reference. So I don't know where that split is going to be between people buying these pre-made applications for mixed reality versus versus building their own if you're, the Department of Defense, or if you're, a giant manufacturer or something, or automaker like Toyota, choosing to use which way they choose to go will be interesting to see. But I think they're clearly making an effort to show the practical uses of all the tech through these apps that they're now branding as D365.
And apart from our slate of recent technical coverage, there was also some very unfortunate news just a little less than a week ago from Christchurch in the South Island of New Zealand with the massacre at the two mosques there, which ended up impacting the Microsoft community as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It was obviously the whole event was shocking and really tragic. And then I think a day or two after the news broke, and I think people started getting an understanding of who exactly was killed and impacted. News came out that two well-known people in the Microsoft community were also two of the victims. One of them, Syed Jahandad Ali, was a member of the Dynamics 365 community. He was a consultant for Intergen in New Zealand. And I know, a reader of our site and an active community member, and his the CEO of Intergen had some very kind words to say about him. And another Microsoft MVP, or former Microsoft MVP, Atta Alian, was the other sort of Microsoft connection there. He was an entrepreneur. So very sad news, and seems to be a lot of community members kind of pulling together and sort of recognizing them and honoring them. So sad news, and I felt it was worth sharing on our site to the extent that we could.
And always a good reminder of how truly global the Microsoft Dynamics community is, how it really extends across the world, and involves people from all sorts of different backgrounds.
Absolutely, it's one of the really great things about the Microsoft ecosystem and the Dynamics ecosystem.
We also reported recently on the first preview of Dynamics 365 Business Central's new base application. Jason, could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so this was really the next step in an approach that Microsoft forecasted several months ago, that as a part of the modernization of Business Central away from sort of the traditional nav application development approach, they are sort of migrating it in stages. And I think I had to reference back to the old article because there were so many good sort of graphics that I show with like different kinds of blocks and so forth, what that really means. But and I'm not a developer, so I'm going to try not to over-explain this inaccurately. But they're at that first stage in that plan, which is to create a base application that sort of encompasses all of Business Central in the new AL language, and from there they'll start basically divvying it up into multiple sort of applications that do the various things that business to better represent what Business Central does and the various components and capabilities of it. So over time, you'll start to see sort of a smaller base application with more modular applications above it. And I think I think I first talked about this with AJ Ansari quite a while back now in the fall of 2018. But it's an exciting approach, and if Microsoft can continue to execute on it and really move I think it's a 5 to 10 year plan, honestly, so it's not going to happen quickly. But if they can continue to iterate on this and really build out a modular approach, Business Central is going to be something along the lines of what you have with the customer engagement side, at least in theory, that components can be swapped out, that custom apps can be made a real an element of the Business Central model sort of more easily, and really kind of open up some pretty interesting new possibilities for the product. So I think it's sort of proof positive that Microsoft's moving in the right direction that they said they were going to, and I have to sort of watch what developers find, and because they were really the first people to dive into this one. They started trying to stand up the new sort of Docker image with this base application and try to make it work. It's totally early days, where it's nowhere near sort of ready for production yet. But clearly it's moving ahead, and R&D is running with it. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes next.
In addition to our regular news coverage, we've continued to have many great expert pieces throughout this winter. One recent one was from Nicholas Hayduke, And he gave sort of a brief history of Microsoft Dynamics 365's portal, where it came from, and sort of where it's heading from here. Jason, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Nick was on actually on the podcast recently to talk about Portal also, and I think his idea to give a little brief history made a lot of sense, sort of following that, and I think because of his perspective, that's really starting to enter a new sort of point in its development, or a new age for its as a product. It was acquired. It's been sort of reforming itself into what it is today, and with CDS and PowerApps, it's really set to take on a new phase of its life. So yeah, it's worth reading. It does give a really good perspective on where it's coming from, and probably a little bit on where it's going. I mean, the need for portals is certainly not going away. I think, if anything, it's still an underused product at Microsoft, even though it's got so much potential. And when it comes to customer experience, I mean, portals are a great opportunity for customer experience and making it very industry specific. So I mean, I think I'm with Nick on his perspective that there's a lot more that could be done with Portal, and I think what he's sort of hinting at is that Microsoft is in fact on board with this idea. But I mean, they have so much going on that it'll be very interesting to see sort of how it fits in with alongside PowerApps, where you can build other kinds of apps that might seem like a portal, and he actually does even address that and why it's not exactly the same. So if you're trying to understand the differences and where it's going, definitely worth a read.
On the subject of portals, and in fact, ADX Studio, which was sort of the origin of the product for Microsoft when they acquired ADX Studio in September 2015, highly recommend that anyone interested in reading more about this topic also check out a recent interview that I did with Colin Vermander, developer, veteran of ADX Studio, and expert on all things portals based in Ottawa, Canada, which appeared in MS Dynamics World about 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Colin's another one of the sort of go-to people when it comes to Portal, and other former ADX Studio employee, now with KPMG. And that was
KPMG Canada, yeah.
Right, and I agree. That was an interesting piece.
We've also been continuing our Finance Where I'm From series. Most recently, we've been looking at Egypt, particularly collecting VAT tax, thanks to contributor Mohammed Amr, who recently relocated to the U.S. to work for Microsoft here, but brings years of experience working in Egypt to the table in his great article on the subject. And I can't cover all of the details that Amr shared with us. One of the points that he does make is that there's no specific localization for Dynamics 365 for finance and operations for Egypt, and there's a tendency in Egypt for the tax code to change quite a bit. It's a newly developing country, and so tax codes change very, very quickly compared with the US, Canada, and Europe. And for that reason, there may be some good reasons to actually consider manual processes rather than setting up a whole customization. But it very much depends on the use case, and he goes into all the detail about that.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of this series. I do hope we can do more of them. If there's anyone from other countries who are even listening now and thinking I could write about what finance in my country is like, please do reach out to us. We'd love to do more of these kinds of pieces. And Mohammed is probably the best resource that I know of who could write about financial management from Egypt. So it was really nice to see that he put this one together.
Another one of our contributors, a new contributor actually in this case, Alan Lee, who's the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Channel at Margin Point, took an interesting view of inventory management with D365 for field service, because that's sort of his company's area of specialization. And he makes a lot of great points in his article about the tendency of many electrical, mechanical, and plumbing companies to kind of have a tendency to be stuck in older processes and operations that can become unmanageable over time. And he explains in great detail how D365 can help to streamline things even for these relatively small businesses.
Yeah, I would just add, I'm certainly not an inventory management or a field service expert, but I think he makes a very important point that if you're planning for field service deployments and you're and you're not thinking about how to use it to improve your inventory management, I think you're making a mistake.
We also welcomed a new contributor whose specialty is really in all things Azure. Many of our readers will notice that over the past 6 months, we've been really expanding our coverage of Microsoft Azure because Microsoft's cloud is poised to play just such a critical role going forward for all business applications and really the entire Microsoft ISV and partner channel. And Greg has really been great at kicking us off into some expert content about Azure, with his focus recently on Azure management groups. And I can't go into all the details today, but Greg makes some great points about Azure management groups and sort of the hierarchy for building them out. And there's lots of great opportunities with management groups to sort of manage subscriptions and ideally get greater efficiencies or better topologies out of existing Azure operations.
Yeah, it's one of those topics that I didn't really know about before this, so his explanation was really valuable, and you can sort of see the depth that it can go to. I mean, up to 10,000 management groups in a single tenant. The ability to really get fine-grained and define what gives. I guess what I'm trying to say is it gives an IT team a really sort of specific perspective on how they're going to manage their Azure resources.
And one of our other expert contributors, Steve Witt, wrote about the topic of essentially how to use, I guess you would call it automation and the kind of automation capabilities of the Power Platform and Teams to really improve processes in U.S. federal and state government, but really governments around the world. And this comes in context of the recent U.S. federal government shutdown throughout December and January, which naturally is, by many accounts, sort of placed strain on hiring of much needed IT professionals. And so many government agencies may, in the face of competition from the private sector, need to really redouble their efforts to use business apps to get as much done with as few people as possible.
This article came out sort of before Microsoft's most recent update on its ability to sort of comply with government cloud community impact levels, but so you have sort of two sides to this, I guess. One is Microsoft pushing hard to try to reach sort of the most, comply with like sort of broadest range of U.S. federal departments, and with its cloud offerings, and presumably working in other, it is working in other countries as well to sort of offer similar levels of compliance. And then partners have this other perspective on it, which is sort of looking for some of the, I guess, being able to use those sort of systems and cloud environments to, ideally offer process improvement and, doing more with less and so on and so forth. And this piece gives a nice perspective on where partners should be looking today to really do some of those kinds of to sort of surface those kinds of opportunities to their government or government related clients.
And certainly overall, Microsoft is really, I think, redoubling its efforts to focus on government customers, particularly in the United States, but really internationally as well. Previously, AWS has had a lot of sort of leadership in terms of FedRAMP certifications, the federal standard for high-level data security. And lately, in the past several months, we've seen Microsoft beginning to catch up to the lead that Amazon has sort of established, getting its own FedRAMP certifications, even getting certifications from smaller governments like the Korean information security certification that it got several weeks back. And so it'll be very interesting going forward to see how Power Platform and Azure can be deployed along with Dynamics for all these different government needs.
Yeah, I mean, make no mistake about it. This is an all-out war between Microsoft, AWS, Salesforce, Oracle, IBM. I mean, these companies have never been fighting harder for their share of government spending on IT.
And in fact, Microsoft actually seems to be pretty well poised, even if it may not get the so-called JEDI contract from the Department of Defense for a new defense cloud. It does seem to be pretty well poised for potentially billions of dollars of spending on HoloLens devices and, above all, enterprise information systems of all kinds, Office 365 dynamics and so forth for federal agencies.
Yeah, I'm also very interested to see how how their expanded support is going to bring about more use of Teams, of more use of perhaps Power Platform, which I know was part of their latest announcement is compliance of Power Platform in. So that's Flow, Common Data Service, Power Apps within a government cloud environment. It seems like a good opportunity. We'll have to see how hard they're able to. Microsoft ends up pushing on that, and what kinds of interesting stories. Because I mean, so many of the government, or sorry, so many of the Power Apps, great Power App stories, for example, that the Power Apps team loves to talk about. Just thinking offhand here, but most of those do seem to be private enterprise that I can think of. I know there's like the French Railroad, which I think is a nationalized outfit. There might be some others, but anyway, I think that's a lot. There's a lot of sort of new app development probably coming out of government that Microsoft and others would love to be able to call upon to show how great their latest offerings are.
Well, that brings us to the end of our roundup today, but be sure to check out plenty more articles from both our expert content and our regular news coverage on msdynamicsworld.com.
All right, thanks, Eamon. Yeah, it should continue to be a busy time. I know we have sort of a list of things in the editing queue right now. I'll be heading to the user group summit and Extreme 365 events in Amsterdam next week, and so it'll be very nice to get a little bit of an update from Microsoft to the user base and to partners to some extent about what is new, what is coming up next, and to kind of gauge the community's attitude toward all this fun new stuff.
Until next time, I'm Eamon McCarthy-Earls.
I'm Jason Gumbert. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World signing off.